All right, welcome back, everybody. Another Saturday, another stay-at-home Saturday during the spring of 2020. So another great chance for me to take a look at my CD collection on my shelf, pick out an artist that I love, look through my collection, and put my CDs in the order that I still love them today. So today's artist came from a friend's request, and they asked me to take a look at one of my all-time favorite bands, Journey. Now, many of you know Journey for a lot of maybe pop song reasons, and "Don't Stop Believin'" is the song that rises to the top for many people. For me, that's not my favorite Journey. I recognize it as a great song, but I'm a little tired of it. Heard it a lot over the last 30, 40 years of my life. So I'm going to show you my collection from top to bottom. Like most of the artists that I love, I'm a completist, but in this particular case, I'm missing one Journey disc, and it's on purpose. Back in high school, I owned an album called Raised on Radio. It came out in 1986. It was Journey Light. It was Journey with just three of its recording members at that time, and then two studio musicians. Steve Smith and Ross Valerie were told to hit the bricks. And they brought in Randy Jackson from American Idol to play bass, and another guy named Barry, who I can't even remember where he came from or where he went to play drums. And it just was not a great album. It felt like a Steve Perry solo album to me. And although that makes it good music, it didn't make it great Journey music for me. So Raised on Radio never made it from my LP to CD collection. Just never liked the disc that much. So it's on the skids. The rest of the other 15 albums here represent the collection that I have today in the order that I would listen to them in 2020. So let's get started. First up, I'm going to take you to the original Journey, the Journey before Steve Perry even joined the band, and show you a part of my collection that includes what was then known as the Golden Gate Rhythm section. This was Neil Schon and Greg Rowley coming out of Santana in the early 70s, and they formed a band called Journey that included Ross Valerie and included Ainsley Dunbar on the drums. And that band recorded three pretty great jazz fusion records, but not at all like the Journey that you know. So the first release from them was the self-titled Journey, and Of a Lifetime is a great song to play. Topaz is a great song to go back and play. Mystery Mountain is kind of a fun one at the end. There are some great jazzy fusion songs on here, but I don't grab this one very often, much like the next one, Look into the Future. And Look into the Future for me is a very similar vibe. It's a progression, of course. Anyway is a great song on there. I'm Gonna Leave You is a little bit of a glimpse of maybe where Journey might go in the future. But again, not a lot of singles on this record, a lot of long running, fun jam songs. So if you like jam bands, you'll like those first two records, along with the third in that series, Journey Next. Now, this album probably was the best of these three, and Spaceman was great, Hustler was great, Nickel and Dime was great. These were some great jam songs, but I think it was around this time that their manager, Herbie Herbert, said, look, we've got to get a singer in the band and write something that can play on the radio. Otherwise, we're just, Columbia's going to kick you to the curb, and we're not going to have a recording contract. So this band did, in fact, do that. We'll get to that part of the story later, but I'm going to jump much further ahead in my Journey collection to a self-released record. Journey put this out themselves in the mid-2000s. This is when Steve Augeri was in the band, or Augeri, not sure, I think it's Augeri. But Neil Schon, Jonathan Cain, and that version of the band put out Red 13. It was their 13th release. It's kind of a mini album, 5 songs on it, so not a really big release from them. So it's the lack of songs that puts it low. It's great music. I enjoyed listening to it when it came out. State of Grace sounds like classic Journey, and if you haven't heard Steve Augeri sing, man, he is a great Journey singer. But Red 13 just doesn't get a lot of plays because it's 5 tracks. Another CD from that version of the band came out in 2005. This was the recording that effectively ended the run for Steve Augeri, and that was Revelations. Now, Revelations has a great Journey hit on it, Faith in the Heartland. The Place in Your Heart is also great. Every Generation, great. Some of the other singers in the band showed up on this record. Ross Valerie sings a track. Dean Castronova sings a track. Arnel Pineda would be coming in later, and so we'd get different voices in the band. But at this point, Steve O'Gary's voice was starting to show its weathering, and so they had some shared vocals on the album, some shared vocals on the tour. And before you know it, he was not able to tour with the band anymore. They brought in Jeff Scott Soto for no record, just to continue a tour with Def Leppard in 2006. That didn't last, and then they brought in our buddy Arnel Pineda. I won't tell you the story, but this was the record they brought out with Arnel. They brought him into the band, and man, brought this just full production record. It's got 3 discs. This one's a recording CD with a great song, Never Walk Away, and some other great tracks on there, including a re-record of Faith in the Heartland. They have a DVD of the live show. Got to see this show at the Aladdin Theater. I think it's now the Planet Hollywood Theater in Las Vegas. And then a re-recording of some of their greatest hits. So this has Wheel in the Sky, Faithfully, Separate Ways, Open Arms, Stone in Love. A lot of great songs on there, re-recorded by Arnel with the band. That CD was Revelation. A really great release, just a heck of a lot on there, which is why I probably grab their next record more often, Eclipse. Eclipse is really great Journey music. Arnel is singing fantastic. Neil Schon is just flying on this record. It's a great guitar record. If you like the guitar rock version of Journey, Eclipse is great. I mean, just put it on and listen. There's really not a song on here that I don't enjoy, other than maybe the last track, Venus, but a great listen through and through. And by the way, I should note that both of these records with Arnel are with Kevin Shirley back on the production team, somebody who I think was really helpful to get them back on track with these next 2 selections. Going back to Steve O'Gary, his first release with the band was Arrival, and I'm telling you, this holds up with any classic 80s, 90s Journey you've ever heard. It's excellent. It plays all the way through. Higher Place kicks off with a bang. All the Way is a great song. Signs of Life, and it just keeps rolling. I love putting this on when I want to hear something that feels like classic Journey, but not something that I've maybe heard thousands of times. It still sounds fresh to me. And Gary's voice was great at this time, so it sounded strong. And if you closed your eyes, it was hard to tell that Steve Perry wasn't in the band. Go back and check out Arrival if you haven't heard that one already. All right, next up is the last release with Steve Perry in the band. They got back together in the mid-90s, and in 96, they released A Trial by Fire. Now, Message of Love kicks this thing off, and it kicks into gear fast. This sounds like classic Journey. If you loved classic Journey, this is the classic Journey lineup in the band. But interesting, you know, if you see Steve Smith over here, and you see Neil Schon, and you see Ross Valerie and Jonathan Cain, look where Perry is. He's looking the other direction. And that was sort of foreshadowing, because he was out of the band again within 2 years and hasn't been back since, other than the Hall of Fame induction where he showed up, and the I think the Rock Walk of Fame, in Hollywood where he showed up. He just doesn't hang out with the band anymore. And so 25 years ago, this is the last time you got a chance to hear Steve Perry on a Journey record, and it's fantastic. All right, now we're getting into the classic Journey records, so I'll move through these quickly. Most of you remember these if you were a fan of Journey in the 80s. And first up on my list, or next up, will be Frontiers. You know, I remember this when this came out in high school, and it was all over the radio. I mean, it was full of hit music at that time, and it still had a rock edge to it. Separate Ways kicked it off, a track they still open concerts with to this day. It's just one of those tracks that sets the right mood and the tone. But Send Her My Love was a classic MTV video. Faithfully, I think, was the bigger MTV video. But I like some of the tracks on there that weren't the big hits. Chain Reaction, After the Fall, those were great songs. Again, a fun record to go back and revisit if you haven't listened to Frontiers in a while. All right, this one probably is going to surprise somebody, because next up on the list is Escape. And yes, Escape, their biggest and best-selling album of all times. It's a classic, no doubt about it. And I do love listening to Escape. I hope I'm not offending anyone who thinks this is their favorite record. But here's the deal. I've heard it so often that I just don't go back to it as often. But it is definitely a Journey record you can press play on and listen to from top to bottom. You know Don't Stop Believin', but Stone in Love, Who's Crying Now, Keep on Running, Still They Ride, and get into the B side of the album, what we used to call side 2 of the LP. Escape, Lay It Down, Dead or Alive, Mother, Father, and of course, the ever popular Open Arms. Not as popular with me, but that's what the fans love. Okay, if you've already seen those 2 records, which may have been some of your favorites, you're thinking, well, I know what's left. I just don't know what order they're going to come in. And I'm going to put them in order for you in exact reverse of the order they came out. Because next up for me in Journey today is Departure. Now, I love this record. When I put it on, it just feels warm and cool to me. Greg Raleigh is still in the band. Jonathan Cain had not been part of the band at this point. And this was a record that I felt really strongly about at the time, and I still love it now because you get a lot of those cool dual harmonies where Greg Raleigh is singing some of the lead and Steve Perry singing some of the lead, or they share harmonized background vocals with each other. It just sounds great, track for track. Love this thing. A lot of people loved Any Way You Want It, and that's the way you need it if you loved it. But there's some other great songs on here. I'm a big fan of Line of Fire. That's a rocker. I love going back to it. Not a bad song on the disc. And next up in that order would be Evolution. Evolution came out just the year prior. Again, same lineup of the band. Steve Smith on the drums, and still Greg Raleigh in the band. So you get all those great, cool harmonies that I just talked about. But I think even better songs. I mean, Majestic is this cool opening that kicks into Too Late. Everybody loves Love and Touch and Squeeze, and I'm a big fan of the track that it used to kick into, if you remember FM radio, City of the Angels. Loved listening to that one. And just going back and listening to all of these, just the same way, never gets old. Love listening to this album, and man, it's hard to believe it's not my favorite, but when I go back, it's just hard to deny that the first record they got with Perry is still an epic, and it's Infinity. This record is just an awesome, awesome, awesome classic Journey record. It's so fun to go back and listen to Lights and Feeling That Way, Anytime, Wheel in the Sky, Winds of March. It's just an epic record. It has a really cool 70s sound to it, which I love. It's got Ainsley Dunbar on the drums, who was on those first 3 records, and he's just an octopus of a drummer. So some really cool heavy drumming on this one, where Steve Smith, when he got into the band, was more of a jazz drummer, so a little bit more style and flash, where Ainsley just was a rocker. And you may remember Ainsley ended up leaving this band and showed up on an album called Whitesnake in the 80s, the 1987 album, so a monster drummer. But that's my favorite Journey album currently, and I'm going to put them back in reverse order for you, with number 1 being Infinity, with number 2 right here being Evolution. Number 3 is going to be Departure. Next up, the classic Escape, followed by probably another classic, Frontiers. A great reunion record, Trial by Fire. A great record, I think, to kick off a new decade with a new singer. That's Arrival. Really go back and check that one out. I highly recommend it. Their last release, which I think is a great rocker, right there, Eclipse. Sounds like classic Journey with a real kick in the shorts if you love Neil's guitar. An epic release here. The Revelation, just really cool packaging. Great listen to go back to this one. Not again my favorite here, but still some great songs on Generations. Red 13, good, just short, good and short. And then the original classics. We've got Next, we've got Look Into the Future, and the original Journey. So folks, that's my Journey collection. If you loved Raised on Radio, good for you. It's just not in my collection anymore. That's my top to bottom. I hope you enjoyed them. I'd love to read your comments below. If you've got different thoughts on Journey, different songs you love, different albums you love, Journey's one of my favorite bands, and I never get tired of talking about them. Hope to hear from you soon, and I'd love to get your feedback on the comments below. Have a good night.